and also to give a lot of practical experience in astrological counselling. So today we're going to start off by discussing, with a negative maybe in view of the Sun opposed Neptune we got today, what problems do you have as far as astrological counselling do you see as far as astrological counselling are concerned. And then after we talked about that for a little while, we thought we would then try and lay down a few principles that we found useful in our own counselling and discuss with you how you feel about these principles. And then we would actually use some. I'm going to ask for a guinea pig in a moment, so maybe while I'm talking you could think if you want to be a guinea pig. And maybe give a few examples of how we would handle particular questions that you might have about your own chart in front of everyone else. And then split you up so that you can do a bit of practice in counselling in smaller groups, depending on how many charts we've got. So that's what we have scheduled for today. On tomorrow's session, Gary has some very interesting techniques which are both which we can all try. Very good techniques for making contact with people and improving contact with other people. And then on Saturday morning, I'm going to lead a session where on Friday I will give people charts, 2 or 3 charts, for them to absorb thoroughly. Then on Saturday we're going to take it in turns, or we won't all have a try, but we'll have a go. One person will actually be that person, not themselves, but the chart they've been studying. And another person will be the counsellor, and we'll ask them to counsel about certain things. So to put you in this totally objective point of view. So those are the 3 basic scopes we're going to cover in these sessions. Sorry, I should have told you to start the tape. You have started. Excellent. Thank you very much. So the first thing we need to know is, has anybody got a chart here they wouldn't mind sort of being counselled on in public? Yep. Good on you. Could you give it to Helen, and she'll put it on the board in the course of the next few minutes, and we'll come to that, back to that later. How many people else have charts here? Good, that's excellent. So later on we will break up into small groups and to get people to advise each other on charts. How many people who know nothing about astrology do we have here who feel themselves beginners? Oh, maybe the beginners...
They would have charts too.
Yeah.
You haven't got
Well, it's all right. The beginners could probably mix themselves up with people who've got more experience so they can listen in. Okay. Right. So that's our organisation done. So let's get on with the first point on the agenda, which is what are your problems as far as counselling?
I don't know, this chart is missing all its casts. They haven't written in the degree, and they haven't really written midheaven on this one. So it's not really. It's not
difficult to use.
That's a pity. Deco, is it?
You've got the ascendant, but you haven't got the midheaven.
Yeah,
unless the midheaven is the 10th house cusp, is it?
Oh, well, this must be it here. But they've got.
Oh, yeah, that's the midheaven.
Yeah. There's no degrees on it. There's always.
Oh, yes, there's to read them off. You see, like that's Scorpio.
Yeah, I know that, but we haven't got the. Yeah,
there's your degrees, so that's 26 degrees.
Okay.
And that's about 8 degrees, 9 degrees. Yeah, just read them off. They're measured in rather than written.
They count them out. Okay.
We've got them in 5s and 10s, so you can read them off quite easily. Right. Is that all right? Can you work with that? Okay. Right, what problems? Sorry, did somebody else want to say something? No? Any problems with counselling that you've either had as a person who's been counselled or a person who's tried to counsel other people? Yes?
I think the main thing for me would be deciding how much to say, really. Needing to set maybe a time limit and deciding whether to address the issues that transits are activating right now, or whether to attempt to just go through the whole chart and give a feel of it all. How much to be guided by what they want to say, and how much to decide what messages you want to give them.
Well, first of all, for a person to be able to handle the current energy, they first of all have to have a good grounding. You've got to tune them in to their own basic natal energies in a conscious way, in a way that they can relate to and understand. And what you do is you relate to the client and you see how they're experiencing those energies and where they're manifesting them. And that's when that's where you relate to them, that's where you talk to them at, where they're at.
So you give them an overview first. You know, there are some people that sort of overwhelm you with questions, and so they're structuring it through their questions. Now, to what extent do you go with that, or do you decide you need to let them know these basic things in the time available and then allow so much time for questions?
Well, you do what I think is most helpful for them. If you think that they're going to learn by asking you questions and you coming back with the appropriate information that's related to the chart,
so
relate it back to the chart.
One aspect. That's the thing.
I think there's a skill that one has to learn when one's starting with the counselling. I think it's something that we as astrologers all tend to feel that, in a sense, we haven't got a very good, as a profession, we haven't got a very high standing, and I think we're all, in a sense, trying to help people. And I think that what a lot of astrologers do at the start is actually spend an enormous amount of time and energy with the person, which is good, but it's often unnecessarily so. Like, I can remember spending 4 or 5 hours quite easily when I first started doing charts, being utterly exhausted, and somehow by giving myself a time reference, saying, okay, in 2 hours I'm going to try and cover this, I've actually managed to, get through most things, well, get through it all in that time. I think you've got to be flexible.
Cover the basic natal pattern plus, important transits right now.
Account of progressions and transits, yes. You often find that you get it to an optimum point with your client. You get to an optimum point where you've given them the basic stuff they need to know about their own energies to work with at that point. And you begin to feel when you're there, and you leave them at that point, and making sure, telling them the chart is always open-ended in its interpretation. There's no finality about what's just being covered, but it can always be come back to and interpreted again.
I have a very definite technique. I was put in a situation where I was suddenly given a tremendous amount of charts to do in a very short period of time, and I just literally couldn't spend 4 hours with people. And it was going to have to be an hour to an hour and a half unless there was some dire emergency. The way I approach things, which is my own individual way, it's not the only way to do it, it's just my particular way, is that I usually spend about 20 minutes to half an hour without the client saying very much. I make a contact with them when they first arrive, explaining the basic natal progress and transit situation. I see the natal chart as the energy a person was born with. The progress chart as the way that energy is likely to have developed up to this point, and the way looking ahead is likely to develop in the future. And the transit chart as the way that the world is coming to meet them. So I try to give them a very objective synopsis of that. But I try to, while I'm doing that, not just impose it on them saying this is you, but these are the kind of range of potentials you've got, bearing in mind you're working with this sort of energy. And then I relax and just interact with the client, because then I've given myself something to refer back to. And you'll find 9 times out of 10 that a person, if they come with a problem to an astrologer, it's usually related to 2 or 3 configurations on the chart, that, unless they're really advanced people, it's very immediate configurations, like a major transit or a major progression affliction or something like that. And the counselling is not so much in actually explaining all the details of the astrology to them, as in working in a feeling way with what it's like to have your progress sun having moved into an opposition to your Saturn at a time when the transit in Uranus is conjunct in the Saturn or something like that. You've got to get them to come to terms with that experience and make choices about what they can do, and realise that these experiences are related to time, that this year is the time they have to cope with it. Next year there'll be new experiences to go with. There's incredible relief comes to people when they realise that the whole of their life is subject to time and cycle, that what seems to be impossible at the moment will in fact change. And therefore really what I'm saying in a nutshell is try and get around this problem of trying to give too much detail. You can explain far too much detail to people, so it becomes a pure infatuation. It's a sort of self-infatuation thing which isn't really very helpful. What you want to do is to get something objective and then try and get to the point where you're working with the energies that are particularly pertinent to them at the moment, and work with them until they feel at peace with them.
Do you do it in an astrological language, or do you do it in a... Do you, for example, say, oh, your Pluto is transiting your natal sun or something?
Well, it's very helpful.
Try and avoid that.
It's very helpful. Yeah. Sorry?
I was just going to say that some clients are able to relate to that language very well.
Oh, you obviously have done astrology, but I mean the average person who comes to see anyway.
I do say that. For one thing, it centres me on the immediate energy, and for another, having said it, it certainly does have a meaning. Obviously, you then go on to explain it, but I think it is useful to actually verbalise what is happening, so long as you don't blind them with astrological terms and no explanations.
There's three levels, right? There's the level of the pure abstract description, the symbolic language, sun opposed Pluto, whatever it is. Yeah. There's the level of the keyword interpretation. Self-expression is not working hard, it is opposed to your transformation energy, which is also almost meaningless to the layperson. Then there's the third level, where you say, look, you really are going through, you're facing up to a real sort of frightening experience, which is going to really shatter and upheaval your life, and that's really difficult for you to handle at the moment.
Yeah, well, that seems to me to be the hardest thing in astrology. It's not interpreting the chart, but getting it down so your average man on the street could understand exactly what you think.
Yeah, what Kathy was saying is that sometimes in order to centre herself, she has to use the technical language, so she keeps the truth.
I make a statement and sort of mull over it a little, and then go on to say this, and say how long this is going to be in effect, what sort of effect this is going to have on the person's life, etc. And it becomes a sort of identifying thing.
You start by explaining, for example, what all the symbols mean in a chart, because that can be very time-consuming business. If you start doing that, you can spend an hour just...
It can take a long time.
As a polarity meaning.
I hand out a little sheet with that already on.
But it's practice, you know. It's practice. It's dealing with people. That you learn how to relate to people. You use a little bit. You do use the terms for the planets and so forth, and squares and what have you. At the same time, making sure that they understand the meaning of that energy. That they have an understanding of what you're talking about.
But your average person who's never studied astrology will not, in that short period of time, ever have an understanding of the nature of a square, for example. So
they'll know if they've experienced that. Like what you're doing is you are trying to find out where they are with the experience of their chart, with the experience of those natal energies, which, you know, they're not their charts. They are growing through their charts. They're the energies that they're working through this time around. And your job is to make them aware consciously of their unique individual energies. And when you set out to do that, I always say to my clients, look, if there's anything you don't understand, please just stop me and we'll make it clear. And if you've got something that you want to add, please do. And it's very much a give and take. But, you know, one finds that it's practice that makes it so that you have to, as your understanding of the principles of astrology is deeper, then it's easier to relate that meaning to the client in a, perhaps even on an empathic level. Yeah.
I think it's important to realise that these symbols have an incredible amount of power. The closer you can get to the pure archetype of the symbols, the greater power for understanding and help and objectivity you can give to a person. Now you've brought out, of course, that the average man in the street doesn't have an understanding of these symbols, but the art of counselling, or one of the arts of counselling, is to bring a person as close to an experience of the symbolic language as possible. I tend to, in the early stages of consultation, when I'm doing this rundown thing I was talking about earlier, I talk about where their sun is, I talk about where their moon is, I talk about where their ascendant is, and I give them the technical details, and then I explain it in ordinary language. And I go as far as I can along there. I also talk about cardinal, fixed, mutable, negative, positive, fire, earth, air, water, because these are things it's easy for people to understand even if they know nothing about astrology. When we get into complex astrological statements such as Sun in the third house conjunct Pluto in conjunct to so-and-so in another house and all that sort of thing, obviously I don't say all that. Unless we get to, when I've got to the real nub, later on we're talking about their problems, and I can see exactly what the problem is that they are manifesting in ordinary language in their life. And I can say, look at this chart. Now look, you can see this aspect between that and that. Now this is coming there, that's coming there. Now you don't know what this technical stuff means, but this has got a certain amount of time it's going to be going through there. When it moves through there, and it come back there, and so on and so forth. I explain it to them in that way. And that's often incredible help for people, even if they don't understand what the technical stuff means, or the foundation of it. It's such a help to realise there is a sort of movement, just like a doctor explaining illness to somebody, you know.
I think David wants to say something.
Sorry, David.
This is because it gets to their subconscious,
Right.
the areas that they don't understand,
Yeah.
and that they need to, and they're only coming to us when they want something beyond their ordinary, everyday intellectual appreciation of their problem, and they can verbalize it as much as anyone else. It seems to me that the crux, I forget your name. What's your name? Tony. You brought this factor up about people not understanding it, and of course at the time of the consultation there is a lot to go through, and the complexities of implication of what is said grow. There's Roy or myself or Helen or us, any of us, talking about something, talking about the consequences of something which has happened or is happening in a person's life, and at the same time that they're listening, all the implications of this are arising in their consciousness, and it becomes complex. Now, because this is the whole reason for having a tape of what's going on,
Right.
because one's trying to provide a blueprint that they can come back to, a framework of reference that they can listen to again and again, so that when one talks about either a natal or a transing Sun, Saturn contact, that here is a responsibility for getting to grip with one's own life, that if one doesn't do it for oneself, it won't be given to one. And it seems to me that the real problem that we all face in practice is of posing the questions for people without answering them. And that because there are all sorts of questions come up, and you've got to provoke them and prod them into questioning themselves, into asking questions, and then going away with the kinds of options which are available to them, but without one saying you must do this, you must do that, without taking away their responsibility for making their own choices and suffering the consequences, or enjoying the consequences, whichever.
Thank you, David. Okay, now, we're getting close to the point where I want to start laying down a few principles, or at least suggesting a few principles. But any other questions about problems or anything you want to bring up? We talk that one out.
Just to go back to what I said initially, I understand what you're saying about basically going through it, then opening it up to the client. My experience has been often though that as you're going through it, someone says, oh, and there's a big reaction, I want to talk about that there, and it starts stretching and stretching, and after 2 hours I still haven't got through the whole chart.
Yeah, well, that's where you've got to, this is where you see, like, the chart is an incredibly useful tool. Most forms of personal counselling or assistance, you're totally at the mercy of that sort of thing happening to you.
Yeah.
With astrology, you've got this wonderful objective tool, the chart, in your hand. Now, as you get more and more experienced, you start realising what's a pertinent interruption, what isn't a pertinent interruption. 9 times out of 10, you can't counsel a person astrologically until you've considered the whole horoscope. And therefore, to try and counsel on a partial understanding of the horoscope is to give them imbalanced information. So unless it's very, you won't allow that interruption to last very long, because you say, well, look, wait a minute, let's look at the whole situation, then I'll come back to it. And you'll find if you do that, all the answers are coming later.
Yeah.
So you don't have to look for them now.
Yeah.
You know, until you've looked at the progressions and transits, you can't counsel anybody about anything. Because you can't see how ripe and ready they are to deal with the problems in their natal chart.
There is at this point also the difference between what one sees in the map and the necessity for saying it at that time.
Right.
That there are overall patterns and understandings of the chart which one may have. It's not necessary to say that, which is in fact a philosophical area about things, because it may not be relevant at that point. In other terms, it is relevant. It's something that when holding the framework in one's own head, but not having to share it all.
Quite unusually with the question, it's usually very obvious why this is emphasised at the moment. Say it's one of the transits of the outer planets, and you know, and it's quite obvious. You know you're going to come back to it. You say yes, there is a reason for this, and you've probably been feeling it over the last few months, and it probably has such and such effect. But I want to talk about that later. I not ignore the question, give a brief answer, say yes, I realise why it's important to you in the present time, and I will certainly be back at that point.
So you would, in your own mind, before you see the person, have a fairly clear idea of what you want to emphasise.
Yes, you'd be aware of the major transits anyway, and the major progressions, and you know that there'll be a lot of emphasis on that point. But I always say I am coming back to that, and I know that you've got this feeling at the present, and I know it is vitally important at the present, and I'm not to forget to talk about it.
I mean, in a nutshell, you've got to have a system, you've got to follow the system, but then you've got to be totally malleable once the system's been applied to make it useful. Any other points you want to raise
Well,
about?
I think that most astrologers have their very individual way. I mean, it's
sure.
Yes, they have their own way of moving into the counselling situation. The basis for it, of course, are ever-growing understanding and knowledge of astrology and the welfare of your client and humanity at the deepest place in your heart.
Yeah, and that's very important, because I think one problem that I want to raise that I think astrologers often, some bad astrologers get into, is laying trips on their client. We're going to talk about that later. I won't talk about that now. I think we could probably get to some of these principles we want to talk about. And Helen, I warn you, to clear your fingers of chalk. And we thought we've had a chat between the four of us, and we worked out 4 basic principles that we thought was particularly important to bring up, which might answer many of the problems that we get into with counselling. And Helen, to start with, is going to talk a bit about the whole issue of confidentiality.
Yeah, a person who comes to you to have their chart read, a chart is a very, very private document. If a chart falls into the hands of the wrong person, they can be really quite unscrupulous in their manipulation of the being whom that chart belongs to. So a chart is a very private matter, and one is honoured to be chosen as the astrologer for that person, and their chart is to be treated with respect. You don't, you let the client, or most of my clients, implicitly expect that that is the way that it is. Also, with that helps set the tone of the consultation. Implied in the confidentiality of the chart is the fact that what is happening between you and your client is a very private matter. It's a matter of transformation, and the person has to feel that they are totally accepted by you, that you are there as an astrologer, as somebody who, as a professional who is hoping to guide them to greater understanding of themselves, and they should feel that whatever they need to say, that they should be able to say it, and there's no judgmental attitude there. Also, in the matter of confidentiality comes the fact that you will have somebody come up to you and say, I've got so-and-so's chart here. Will you have a look at it and tell me about it, please? And I'll say, do you have that person's permission? And if they don't have the person's permission, I'll say, well, I'm sorry, but I won't do that. So, like, you've got to have, somebody wants you to look at another person's chart. It's a matter between you and your conscience, whether you do or you don't. But as a general rule, there must always be permission from the person whose chart it is.
And do you seek a written permission independently contributed to that?
If it would depend on the situation. It would depend on the situation. If it was, I might. I never have, but I might. If the situation called for it, I would.
I usually ask them that to get the other person to phone me or write.
Yes.
There's a number of things here, aren't there? I mean, like this whole question of charts of third parties. I mean, the absolute rule is that the chart is totally confidential and that no one has a right to intervene in knowledge of another person's chart, unless, like, where medical doctors would maybe ask a second opinion, where you're consultation between colleagues who understand the rules of confidentiality. This is how astrologers justify comparing other people's charts with each other. But like, if someone comes to you and say, look at somebody's chart for me, then you've got to realise that if you do that, that you are in fact going beyond the normal rule. Now, all rules are made to be broken. But if you realise, that you can always get a vibe where something nasty is happening. You can get that feeling within yourself. If you feel something's not right, if you feel something's nasty, if you have this rule behind you, you'll know what it is. Sometimes it's necessary to break the rule for a greater good. But you've got to be very, 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 very careful about whether you do break the rule or not. Now, there's just a couple of things also here about children. Now, I just tell you my principles on children. I think a child up to the age of about 11, I would happily do a chart for a parent of a child of 11 or younger, without the child's knowledge or permission necessarily. I would be a little bit, if a grandparent asked me to do it, unless I knew the situation, I would want to know how the mother or father felt about it. Right? Children, once they're 11, between 11 and 15, it's a grey area. Be aware that if you do a chart for a child older than 11, and you could be getting into an area where you're giving power to the parent who's not allowing the child to develop. You've got to work out what you're doing it for and how you're doing it. Once they're 15, unless there were very, very exceptional circumstances, you wouldn't do a chart for a teenager unless the teenager was present or clearly given permission for it. As far as public figures are concerned, what can we say?
Public figures.
What can we say? I mean, we still don't know what the date, what time long he was born, and Dennis has got some wonderful ideas tomorrow. Ronald Reagan, having a mother who's an astrologer, he's put out so many times that people are totally confused about him. And Rob Muldoon's even been playing the game for the last 10 years. I mean, we're not quite sure if he's got a Virgo, a Cancer, or some other ascendant. So, with public figures, it is a public figure.
Right, can I make a comment about the other area of confidentiality? It's about people not sharing their own chart, being confidential about their own things. They feel to rush off with their charts and share it with all and sundry, and not realise what they're doing. They've got to get familiar and learn about themselves before they start sharing that little lot out.
Yeah, you've got to be careful. You can just lay yourself out to everybody and never really resolve it. And who do you share the chart with? Who do you respect, I think it's important. I think when people first get into astrology, if they're rather suggestible, particularly awkward Neptune afflictions, they might easily be open to all sorts of influences, one after the other, and completely confused by showing their charts to too many people. It's very important to make a very sensible decision about who you're going to allow to interpret the chart, who you respect. Okay, the other points about confidentiality.
What are the other dangers about showing people your chart?
What are the dangers?
Yes, you mentioned one there about just all the different ideas coming in and
confusing you.
Understanding and confused.
Well,
are there any actual dangers?
Okay, there's many dangers. One example would be the person whose motivation is not clear, who's spiritually or ethically confused, could start misusing you. start misusing your energy, start manipulating you on the basis. I don't want to create paranoia, but this can
Well,
happen.
I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I have a friend who always used to move, I don't know if he did it deliberately or intuitively, but every time he did a chart for a pretty lady, he moved her moon to fit his chart. That's a very basic description.
And I've seen a person, a gentleman who had, he was an astrologer, and he would draw up charts of anybody that came in contact with him, and he would then start very, very cleverly manipulating them. He was on quite a power trip, and because of his knowledge of astrology, he was able to work on their weak points, on their vulnerabilities, on their ego boosts, and manipulate them quite into the position that he could get them into. You know?
I was thinking we're in for a shark guy.
Who?
He who ran Nirvana bookshop.
No,
Don't
not that
be
one.
too specific
No,
about
we're not.
anybody.
He's an Australian.
Oh, good.
Sorry.
But it is very easy to do that. If you find out where somebody's Venus is and how they feel comfortable, you can make them very comfortable.
Yeah.
And then they're going to like you for that. So it is very easy to do.
Well, that's a very not superficial but gentle manifestation of what we're talking
Sure,
about.
I mean, you can use the other planets the same way.
Well, it can get, people that really understand those principles can really use them.
Yeah, I think
you
it
need
gets.
to be careful who you show your soul to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, because also someone's not at the level of development that you're at, they can make a comment that's really completely off the point, but it can be kind of hurtful in a way.
It can damage you, yes.
So I felt that once or twice with comments made about things, and wished that I had not exposed myself to that level of comment, which came from, well, the other person's level, I suppose, but it was painful to have to take it.
Gary, do you want to say?
Yeah, well, it's just, going back to what you were saying, David, that at the charts, I think is more than shows more than psychological things. You're actually seeing archetypal principles. There is that danger of perhaps energy being manipulated in some way through that process.
Oh, you can manipulate people financially, for that matter.
Sure.
Put it on that base level.
Yes, any knowledge that you have of a person can be something you can use to manipulate. But the knowledge you get from a chart is so intimate that it's even more open to manipulation.
Yeah.
Yes, well, in the old days, the people involved with any type of occult activities, would not reveal their birth date or their birth time. They wouldn't give it out for love nor money. They just wouldn't, because of the fact that they were opening themselves to dangers and influences that they would rather be without.
Right, well, like the Scorpio 8th house area, which is very tied in with counselling and psychology, etc. One of the main lessons to learn with that is handling power, or
yes.
not the misuse of power because of the situation that you find yourself in.
But the positive use of plutonic energy rather than the negative. Yes.
So you don't think an astrologer should publish his chart?
We don't need an astrologer to publish his chart. That's a good question.
Because
What are your feelings on it?
I noticed that Robert Hand has done it on a couple of his books, but Liz Green doesn't ever do it.
Yeah, I was thinking about Robert actually. I mean, like, his chart is so unlike any astrologer you've ever met. That, he publishes that with a real joke behind it. Like, you try and manipulate me on the basis of this chart, and you're going to get really confused. He said to me, he said, no psychic has ever managed to predict the future as far as I'm concerned. But like, Robert's a very special case. Now, a lot of other astrologers do publish their chart, including Alan Open, of course.
But Liz Green, for example, she won't. I mean, did you read that book of hers where she wrote about Nostradamus? She wrote a novel which was to do with Nostradamus, and I mean, that was really, she was really writing about very occult matters and with a very occult background. So I can quite understand why Liz Green is very reluctant to produce her chart, because she has that feeling of the fact that she doesn't want to expose herself to all sorts of influence.
Well, let's answer the question. Do you think an astrologer should publish their chart?
I think it depends on the persona of the astrologer, and if they feel that the public is going to benefit by their chart being published. I think it comes down to the choice of the astrologer and the importance of whether their chart's published or not.
Anyone want to add anything to that?
That's what implies some sort of should do it.
Yes, that's a very moralistic way of
I don't
putting
think
the
there's any should about it. If you want to, fine, but if you don't want to, that's fine.
That's what I think too.
And on one level, there's nothing to hide. None of us have anything to hide, actually. And so there's a level where, well, you could show your chart to anyone, and if people wish to misunderstand it or are at a level where they do misunderstand it, well, that's the level they're at, or their problem, or whatever. But you don't really have anything to hide because it's all okay.
You brought up a very good point here. It's a question, you know, like knowing what you're doing. This is what I get from both what you said and what Helen said. If you don't know what you're doing and you're dealing with energy, you know, if I give you the ingredients to make dynamite and say go ahead, you know, you can blow yourself up. So, but if you know what you've got, then you can use those ingredients to very good effect. So the more conscious and aware you are of the energies, the better it is. All these warnings about confidentiality are concerned with that. I agree with you in the ultimate. It doesn't matter what we know as long as we're in control of our destiny. If no one can manipulate us because we're so conscious of what we are and what we're doing, then you're right, no one can manipulate us. But while we're vulnerable, we have to be careful how we expose ourselves.
But in that case, why are we running around flashing our charts at them, you know? I mean, why sort of bother them with our sort of...
And then we get to Helen's basic point. If it's useful, use it.
I think that this makes us very aware of our respect for and responsibility to the people who allow us to use their charts now for examination and
Yes, very good point, really. Yeah.
Any other points on this? Great. Okay. Well, Gary has got something to talk about this whole idea of the danger of laying things on other people. I won't say more than that. I'll let you develop it, Gary.
Right. Yes, it's just that in the counselling situation, that you're actually there for the other person in as much as you can be. That you aren't actually in that situation to for your necessarily first off for your own psychological, to sort out your own problems. I think in any counselling situation, both people are changed by what happens, but I don't think that the primary purpose should be to somehow work through something of yourself. That you're there, that you have as much of your attention on the person and on their needs at that particular point in time. And you know, I think it's very easy if to also do a performance thing where, especially when you start, I know that I've been in this situation when I first started to get a handle on astrology, to actually dazzle somebody for 3 hours with it, you know, incredible detail about their lives.
So wise.
Yeah, right.
So wise. Yes, you understand me perfectly, Gary.
Yeah. And it's for my benefit. It wasn't you know, ultimately much to do with theirs. I mean, yeah. So I think that's something that one has to be very careful of. And the other thing is that if you're doing all the performing, and I think that part of the motivation when I first began was a fear that somehow astrology had to be proven, you know, in some way in that situation. Somehow, out of the bag, you've got to come up with all these things that are just going to stun them, you know, that how on earth could you possibly know it? And that's again, is very silly, and I think dangerous, because it doesn't allow for that two-way flow, which I think has to happen for anything really constructive to occur. So,
anybody want to bring up anything on that?
Well, the extension of that, of course, is where people are fearful about fearful elements in the person's map. The negative response to those factors, to people get negative about Saturn-Pluto contacts. Well, there's feeling that there is an enormous amount of power to be utilised in an external context that need to be externalised and help. I see my role as much as removing roadblocks from a person's path.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, because once those blocks are removed, then the sun works normally, everything else works normally, everything relaxes. They can be conscious of themselves as unique individuals and work at that. So delaying the trips of, oh, it's going to be a tough time for you next year with Pluto proposing a Saturn-Mars contact or whatever, there's a lot of stuff to be shifted in that period. There's a lot of work to be done, but you know, the preparation for it as a dynamic, pretty exciting, if pressing time for them to utilize. And I think that as one gets more and more into a person's map, one sees all kinds of consequential things. For example, one will see people in Sagittarius, with Sun and Sagittarius, for example, have Saturn coming up in the next couple of years to move over their Sun, where they're going to have to really take responsibility for their life and development and not neglect it and catch up with it. So that there are preparation factors. If they've got the decks cleared and everything well organized, then they can utilize that period to the best advantage. And if they haven't, then everything comes in and they feel under pressure and all that. So the awareness of all these needs of the moment, so that they get to recognize what is important to them, where they take on responsibilities that they don't need to take on, all these kinds of things. As I say, removing roadblocks. And that's where the area of not saying things are going to be heavy, but saying there's work to be done, useful work to be done.
Yes, making a person aware of their strengths and weaknesses is very important, and one of the things that we were talking about before, whenever you mustn't be afraid of anything in that person's chart. You've got to, it's your duty to check out how that energy is manifesting, where they are with it. And any negative energy, it need not necessarily be that way at all. You check it out, find out where they are with it, and then look at the ways of transforming that energy, of turning it around. I mean, every square can be, instead of being caught in the ignorant negativity of it, with consciousness and conscious effort, it can be turned around and become a strength in the chart rather than a
Well, it is a strength, isn't it?
It is a strength, yes. It's just a difficult one to actually realise, and with consciousness
But
there
it's
it comes
provocation.
anyway.
Things have to happen with it. Greg can be a block or a provocation.
I also think, I have had a couple of examples, and I don't want to be specific, but I went to one area to do some charts. A lot of people had their chart done by a particular astrologer who'd laid incredibly heavy things on them. They'd picked out certain energies and they said, well, look, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. If you don't do such and such, then that's going to happen, and that's the end of it. And these people were really trembling about it, and really upset. And very specific predictions based on archetypes which may or may not work out like that. And it created a lot of fear. It was almost like a Calvinistic trip that she had laid on these people. And I think we've got to be very careful of doing that. We must realise our own fallibility as astrologers. I'm always pleased to tell people that I can't predict their future. I can only describe the energies that are coming up.
Yes,
I don't want to have
prediction belongs to the past, does it not? When the circumstances are so much more limited.
I never hesitate to correct people who say you're still doing your fortune telling. I say no, I've never done that.
There are a number of astrologers of the older school in the area who have been guilty of this, and I think we all find ourselves picking up the pieces of these. One in my acquaintance who keeps telling people your marriage is going to break up.
Yeah,
There's a chance that the Pluto squaring Venus or something like that. And there's people just crazy.
Yeah, well that's...
Yeah, I've had a couple of marriages to sort out, and because an astrologer's told them their marriage is going to break up for reasons like that, And it's probably the maximum growth point of the marriage, the point where the marriage can do the greatest achievement, and that's astrology.
Or have to.
Anything else on this one, or is that so obvious that we don't need to discuss it?
Well, just an extension of this, because since most of us, at whatever level, find ourselves, if we're counselling our friends who come to us for maps and dealing with this, some of these difficult factors, and what those know, become aware of death as the essential point of the transformation of a life in its everyday context. There are people who are quite scared of death, elderly people, and elderly people who know a little about planetary things. I don't say, oh, I've got Pluto over my sun, and I'm going to kick it. All kinds of things like this. I said, well, I've seen more deaths under transits of Jupiter than any other transit.
Yeah, there are many ways to die, actually. Sometimes, yeah, right. No, astrological ways.
Yes.
Okay, Kathy wants to talk about listening.
Right. This follows on in a way from what Gary was saying about the ego coming over the power trip. You're dealing with a two-way energy here, almost a first seventh house energy, and you have to put yourself in the seventh house of the client too, and be responsive to the client. First of all, of course, make them comfortable, make the atmosphere right for them so that they can respond to you and you can respond to them. No, they have to do the work. They're the people that are going to have to work with the energies. So if they go away having worked it out for themselves, and you haven't told them, you've known perhaps which button to press to get it moving, but they are the ones that should be doing the talking, and you must be all attention too while they're talking. You can't be switching off and making a mental grocery list or anything like that. You have to be total attention to them while they are talking. And this is also helpful to the astrologer because they pick up very useful points and it helps move the consultation in the direction it should be moving. You're picking up hints as to how to cope with another part of the chart as well while you're listening to them. I don't know if I'm making myself very clear.
Oh, you are, because like what you're...
Sorry, you can.
Well, one of the things that, like, I'm in a slightly more... Well, I was fortunate in that, like, I studied psychology at university and I also did counselling course at varsity. So already have been and worked in psychiatric hospitals, so already know the importance of the relationship, the professional relationship, and the importance of the attention, the deep attention being given to that being, and the perception and the observation, which is what you're essentially saying in the listening, and to make them verbalise their own understandings and what you're stimulating in them, their insights.
And I always know that I'm going to have a slightly tougher time of it when I get someone with Scorpio on the third house, cast Pluto in the third, or, because they know, but they're probably not going to give. It's harder to get people to talk about it. They'll agree that you're right, or they know where you're getting at, but it's sometimes a little harder to draw.
Do you find the very specific questions like, tell me about your father? Tell me about your mother.
Yes, I do. I'll throw in a question like that. And it sometimes startles them.
Would you,
but,
to draw them out of their ears.
Surely, would you ask it in relation, like I sometimes hear, would you ask it to check out sort of the moon or how they're experiencing the moon placement, or?
Yes. It'll be for a purpose that I ask a question. And because sometimes you're trying to work out, now, is it experienced this way or this way? A chart is so complex that it could go one way, it could go the other way. And that clues you in as to how to deal with the rest of it.
And how to also, what level of consciousness they're working on in energy. Particularly if you want to say something like, I think your father used to beat you up, and your husband's been beating you up ever since, and you keep on being drawn to people who are always beating you up. That's what the chart says, but you don't feel like saying that to a person.
That's right.
Just off the cuff.
They might come back and say this. Alright?
Then you've got to decide how
And then
much
you got it
confidence.
right. How do we cope with it?
You've got to decide how much confidence you want the client to have in you. So if you think you're absolutely certain this is what happened, you say, was there any aggression between your father and yourself? That gives me the idea that you know what you're looking for. Or if you want to be totally neutral, you play it the Ingram's way, tell me about your father.
Well, it is a roundabout way. And also, you see, I don't know how you, we all gather lots of information for different purposes at one time. I like gathering rectification information at that stage when the time isn't clear, is the Saturn and the 6th or the 7th, and way things happen will give that. But it also builds up, it draws their own subconscious out and what happened early on and provides them with that passage. And I like really them to tell me all about their life right up to the current, up to now, one way or another, and it provides the whole pattern. It's much easier than guessing.
And there is a $64,000 question, which is, what is your time, date and place of birth?
Time.
Now, the number of people who've re-established relationships with parents or other close relatives as a result of being asked that question, and therefore, before even the interpretation started, have made a tremendous leap forward in their lives, is considerable.
Yeah.
Yes, it can be a very magical time. A person having their chart done is a very potent time. It really is. All sorts of things can happen from that.
Well, I think very much so. I think that really puts the problem as an important thing. Here is a person is coming out of their chrysalis. They're breaking out of it, and coming to an astrologer is often just one of the symbolic parts of that. So do they jump into a hostile world or a friendly one?
Well, I'm just been thinking about how wonderful it is that at this point in the field of astrology here in New Zealand, we are actually up to looking at counselling about dealing with people on an astrological basis, on a service helping basis. It's just because astrology has grown so much. So I think it's quite significant that here we are struggling to find guidelines and a format for people in a general way. And it would have to be a friendly world, David. When the person went to find out about their natal potential and their current energies, unfoldment of the energies currently, it would have to be a friendly environment that they went into. It would have to be an accepting astrologer who didn't believe that there was any such thing as a difficult chart.
An absolutely negative chart, totally condemnable chart.
I think this pins down, the course that I personally, and I think most of us, would really like to see become the norm in New Zealand astrology, of us being helpful service. This is what Alan was emphasising this time last year. This is our only purpose. And trying to get rid of the negativities which come from both our own past, from the work of astrology in a negative sense in the past, and to become predominantly aware of this. I don't see us as having any other role, actually, even though we may explore astrology in mundane areas. I think that's more for our own enlightenment than for what, I'm doing this mundane work at present, but that is a purely selfish thing. People are paying me to do something that I enjoy doing, but I'm doing it entirely on my own, for myself, and as long as it goes on being acceptable to them, okay, and if they don't like it, then I'm not going to change it because for any other reason. So I think we can explore the astrological phenomena in terms of the mundane world, looking at the election and all this kind of thing. that's, I think, to aid our own understanding of the phenomena at work.
Okay. Can I just say one thing on this, that the other aspect of listening is if you make a tape recording of the counselling situation, then if you get the client to talk a bit, then they can listen to themselves. And that later on is of incredible value. The number of people said, I was listening to what I said last year and I was listening to what you said and I can see what you meant and I'm glad I had a chance to do that, you know.
Well, I think that it's wasted. The session is wasted if it's not on tape.
Yes, if it's not, that's right.
Yeah, pretty well.
You cannot
Pretty well.
bring the concept.
Because they keep mining, things keep being mined out of it,
So
don't they?
much, there's so much information, yeah. All right, they can go.
I mean, you had-
rather than something written.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Written stuff is really difficult.
Yeah.
There.
It's hard to do, you mean, because the
It's hard to
information
do.
is on tape.
It's hard for the client to really absorb it.
Yes. You've got to
They
get
tend
them
to
working.
pick pieces out of it and rely too much on the pieces they pick out.
But each astrologer finds their own way in. Like for me, for about the first year of doing charts, I would type them all out. That's the way I would do it. And I didn't start using the tape until I was satisfied in myself that I distilled the principles enough to be able to free flow in a helpful way with the client.
There's one more principle we want to deal with, and then I want to do some practical work before we finish, so we better rush on, and I'll try and be fairly brief with this. First, there's 2 points I want to make. The first of all is the motivation is beyond the astrologer's self. I think that's implicit in everything you've said so far, but I want to say it definitely. There's nothing to be frightened of if you're an astrologer. Now, sometimes when you first get into astrology, of course, you find that, or you get, at some stage you get drawn to you all sorts of people you never have anything to do with in normal everyday life. People with all sorts of heavy aspects, things like that against you. Or they might appear to, or you may feel uneasy in relationship to other people. But I've found in my own counselling experience that the greatest benefits come when you just relax. And always I think the solution to any tension in the counselling situation is just to relax and smile and say, look what they've thrown at me now to handle, and look at the chart and get on with it. And I've found that I can make friends with anybody in the world. I couldn't do that before I got into astrology. I kept on judging people in terms of whether they were working and being harmonious to me or not. So it really is important to not, and it's very bad, you say, I'm much happier doing Geminis and Librans than I am. I can't stand doing charts for Scorpios or things like that, I mean, it's a very bad attitude. You've got to be able to love everybody. And you find it's wonderful, it's magical when you do. And in fact, I find, I'm going to sort of talk against myself here, that the easiest charts for me to do are Geminis and Librans, and therefore I find Geminis, because I'm Aquarian, I find Geminis and Librans the most annoying people to do charts for, because it's so easy, we sit there and have lovely, happy chats, but have they really heard anything, From that point of view, you've got to be a bit objective, but I get the greatest stimulus of doing charts of Scorpios and Leos particularly and things like that. But I have no preference, honestly. I'm happy to do charts for anyone.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
How do you deal with tears?
Tears, I just go along with it.
Yes,
They dry up fairly quickly, actually.
I meant to say this too in my listening. If someone bursts into tears, it's no big deal.
But
they need it.
being
Like when I had.
Do you just sit there and wait for them to stop?
No, just carry on.
They should. Well, yeah.
No,
I say that's all right. I don't mind. Yes, I understand that. Why you're weeping? You go ahead. That's fine. I had a lovely consultation the other day. The Capricorn moon, Neptune just gone over it, and Capricorn moon is.
You've got Capricorn moon to cry, did you?
This was something that it was a lot of had been built up, and it was just like the floodgates opening, Neptune transiting, and the floodgates just open, and it was so good for her. And I said, that's all right. You're probably at a weepy stage anyway. You probably find that this happens, and it's maybe out of character for you, but it's a state that you have to go through. It's a state of cleansing. So So, go ahead.
There's no absolute answer to what you're saying, actually.
Making contact at that stage, I find if I just put my hand across and take their hand, even when I go on talking, but I just hold their hand, I mean, while it's going on, so that they know that there's that without having to say anything.
Yeah, I think I want to make this point now. This is sort of what I'm saying about tears is a good example of it. It's important to react to the client in terms of the chart. So your reaction to tears depends on the chart.
Yeah.
Like 9 times out of 10, I don't react quite so totally as Kathy. I don't even say anything about the tears, but obviously I recognise it and I have sympathy. Yeah, I'm Aquarius. But like, if
Neptune Moon conjunction anyway. So.
We just go straight through this, and you'll find if you go straight through the tear situation that the whole question of them crying about that in the future is just totally irrelevant. It's completely cleared it, You can go too far in cheering a person up when they're crying. On the other hand, something.
I don't think one should cheer them up.
So long as the person that is there does not you don't give the impression that you're being fazed by this, or
that you're not
it's
accepting
perfectly natural. It's perfectly all right,
Part of the trip.
and it hasn't disrupted.
All the best people crying here.
To let that person know that you have noticed that it's okay.
Oh,
You
sure,
just
yeah.
cruise on through and don't even make any sort of reaction.
Oh, no.
They're going to feel like they're sitting out there in a tent.
No. They know you. They know you know they cry, and they know you. It's acceptable, and that's a part of a process. That if they want to go through with it, you're not trying to encourage it. You're not trying to discourage it. It's just a natural thing that happens.
Yeah.
I must say it's not that frequent that I've had it happen a few times.
That's not me either, but I'm certain that it's important to acknowledge what they're doing and let them know that it is acceptable. Cruise through it because it isn't happening or whatever else you do.
No, I wasn't suggesting that. It's just the way that you acknowledge. That's what we're talking about.
One of the things that came to my mind as we were listening to the three reactions to a client crying is that often you'll find, like again I said before about the fact that it's quite a magical time, a very potent time when a person decides to have their chart done. And related to that is the astrologer that they go to, is the astrologer who is appropriate for them at that time. So the way that he treats his clients is probably the right way for his clients, and vice versa, and vice versa.
I was putting it down, I'm much more sympathetic than you realise, but Kathy's likely to be more effusively sympathetic, and that's the sort of clients you'd be drawn to.
Exactly what I'm saying. Yes.
Yeah, no,
This
it's
is very interesting, actually, this aspect of the right client, the right astrologer, and I mean, it is a process of natural selection, and the people who have been happy with what you do for them recommend others, and builds up that way, and people who haven't say, I wouldn't do that artist, so and so. Go and ask for Helen instead.
Oh, yeah. Now,
take that knife out of your back.
Right, there's about 2 or 3 other points we want to cover. It's wonderful, it's really been very useful, I think, and it's good to go into this in more depth. Now, from the next point, the whole question of the astrologer must be totally beyond self when dealing with the client, is the idea that in advising the client, it's my opinion, it's probably a very Aquarian idea, but that the client must be advised in terms of a universal perspective. What I mean by that is no good giving advice to people in order that they can gain over the world they're going to move and live in. You've got to realise you're not just the best way to care for your client who's in front of you, who is very important. You have said to that client, for this hour or this length of time we are together, I am totally at your disposal in accordance with truth. Not beyond truth, but in accordance with truth, I'm totally available to you. The best service you can give to them is not to take their side, not to not take their side either, but to place them in terms of their universal situation. Therefore, you must care for the whole world in caring for this person.
Well, because if you don't do it properly, you're going to help them build up more bad karma for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. So the answer, give you a specific example here. If you've got a wife who's having a lot of difficulty with her husband and children and all the rest of it, it's no good giving advice purely from the wife's point of view, trying to sort of dominate the husband without trying to consider the husband's point of view as well. There are occasionally circumstances where the wife is not just telling you she's in a rotten situation, she is in a rotten situation. I've had some really horrible situations that wives are in. And you have to build up their strength in order to carry on with the struggle of their relationship. But you must do it in terms of the truth of what is beneficial for the husband, for the children, for the mother-in-law and everyone else, not just for that person. Because in fact, the real benefit for that person is if everyone benefits, and if the light of radiance and generosity comes out from them to everyone around them. That's the only way they're ever going to be happy.
Do you look up do you ask people then, what's your husband's birthday, and look up their figures?
Well, here we get to difficult situations about confidentiality. This is where I said all rules are meant to be broken. I am quite willing to look at other people's brief details if it's very essential. But sometimes, even without knowing the data of the husband or the mother-in-law of the child, you can sometimes see by looking at this person's chart what the interest of the third party is without knowing their data.
When they say, what should I do?
Yeah.
Advice, like to what extent you as an astrologer set yourself up just as an astrologer, not as a psychoanalyst or a psychotherapist or whatever, what extent do you give advice?
What do you mean, like when they say, what should I do?
They've got somebody there crying their eyes out because husband's left, whatever. You can see why the husband's left, perfect clear, everything crystal clear, it's perfect set up, and then she says, what should I do? I mean,
well, now you've got a situation. Okay, now you've got a situation. Thank you. So this is the beginning of the third Astrology Counselling session. Now, before we actually start doing a counselling session, would any of you like to make any comments on what sort of person you feel this person is? Let's get a bit of combined work together here. So speak out nice and loud so that we heard on the tape. Strong, determined, persistent, intense, fun, probing.
Communication.
Yeah. Any other points? Mm-hmm.
Fearful of the consequences of processes in life which they don't understand.
Mm-hmm. What makes you say that, David?
Saturn in the cusp of the sixth, in the opposition to Mars and the trine to Pluto, all this the Sun, Neptune, Mercury, like going over the chart in Scorpio, will subvert subconscious needs and developments. And although the actual approach is open and direct and independent, in the end result, when you get to the Saturn, they're not satisfied with the consequences, so they don't really know what it is they've got to share outside.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody?
Private life is very important. This high security.
What about their private life? Would it be easy?
No.
Why difficult? Neptune is in the third house. What makes the private life difficult? Twelfth house Mars. In what house? What sign? Opposed to Saturn in Capricorn. Although the opposition is separated. But it's still strong enough to be there, I think.
Oh, without a doubt.
So this client is difficult. What do you think the major problem this client will bring to you? Anybody see what? Can we see what they feel this person's major problems or difficulties will be? Work, health. Can you be more specific, Kathy?
I think, I mean, am I allowed to speak?
Well, actually, no, I'd like you to just sort of absorb all this. I'm trying to give you that sort of thing, because you're going to have to do a big acting bit in a minute, you know. Problem in relationships. Why problem in relationships?
Feel guilty about it. They feel they want the independent relationship.
Yeah.
They feel guilty about having it.
Suppressed anger.
Yeah, suppressed anger. I don't see the relationship emphasis so much because there's nothing in the seventh.
But the moon Venus opposition.
Yeah.
Venus Uranus trine.
Mm-hmm.
Uranus rising. And Venus in the fifth.
Yes.
And the constant which they're happy with in that relationship. But when he gets actually working at it, the Mars Saturn opposition makes it difficult, and the Moon Venus opposition.
Venus is just in the fourth, I think, David. But it's very close to the fifth, yeah. And we need to check up whether there was any precise information here. I've got a feeling this chart may be, knowing the person, I feel the chart may be a little bit inaccurate for time, because I wouldn't be surprised to see that Venus Moon across to the 5th, 11th cusp, knowing the person.
And I think in terms of it, if we remember that the Nadir, this Sun, Neptune, Mercury is past the Nadir.
Yeah.
Anyway, and so from a developmental sense, you could consider that it needs to be fourth house planets as well as third house planets.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So this gives a bit of a feeling of the kind of energies that the person's likely to experience. What do you think? What sort of childhood or adolescence do you expect them to have, bearing in mind the kind of energies they were born with? Anybody got any ideas on that? Tough, someone said. Why tough? The Mars Saturn.
Yeah, I mean, there's an enormous drive here to be independent and unusual and some sort of individual kind of being. And yet there's the Mars Saturn, which is often the frustration of authority in someone.
Yeah.
I don't see it.
I do with the Pluto Venus square. Pluto rules the fourth, Venus rules the 10th.
Is that Pluto square Venus?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misread it.
It's not aspected. It's not aspected.
I see it very private. The child who is really out exploring their own world, and with a private world that they cannot explain to adults.
Yep. But don't forget you've got the Moon exactly opposed to Venus.
Yes.
And that's very close to the 5th, 11th. And I don't know if we concentrated enough on the Scorpio energy. There's a tremendous amount of intensity and desire and mobility from one place to another to fulfill whatever desire is wanted on one level. I wish I could get this. I got a feeling that Venus is in the 5th, but we should interpret the chart as given, of course.
With the conjunct with
yeah, but the opposition, the precise opposition between Venus and the Moon means a misuse of emotional or feminine energy. Bearing in mind this person is a Scorpio and ruled by the Sun. The ascendant ruler is the Sun, which is in Scorpio, which is the Sun sign, of course, and Mars, which rules Scorpios in Cancer in the 12th. So a tendency to be very egocentrically applying desires in ways that sort of maybe be misused femininity, which are very much generated by a sort of self-defeating paranoia within.
But you're not talking about the childhood now, are you?
Well, I'm talking about the tendency of the chart.
Yeah.
But like when you look at childhood, as well as looking at just for childhood on the chart, those areas of the chart you look for childhood, you've also got to look at the incarnating individual coming to terms with the energy they were born with. So you can look at childhood as a point of development of spirituality or spiritual perspective of their situation. With a chart that's challenging, you often find, in my experience, that the person can't cope with the energy through adolescence or has difficulty in coping with the energy through adolescence. And therefore you get the more gross forms of the negativities expressing themselves at that time until they realise the pain of how the negative use of this energy just keeps on causing negative experiences.
Do you actually see this as a difficult chart? I don't. I did an enormously creative chart, a challenging one, with tremendous power and self-development and drive. Yes, the external realities of the world come to terms with, but the private inner life which goes ahead irrespective, and I think it's only the external adult who says misuse of the energy is in this particular way.
Yeah, I take your point. I agree. The potential of this chart is as you describe it.
And it will be shown, that potential will be shown in the early childhood, that misunderstood by the parents, therefore diverted and corrupted at that stage, so they've got to relearn that.
Well, exactly. Therefore, they'd have probably gone wildly their own way, feeling inadequate, until they mastered the energy, and that's the point I was trying to make. Yeah. You see, I see the energy on this chart so dynamic that I feel that until the person gained a sense of confidence and identity with their own individuality, they might have felt that a delinquent or negative pattern and use of desire, and just going their own way and doing what they like for the sake of it, was the only way, until they realised the pain that came back from not acting in a responsible way.
Very early in their life, through Uranus and Pluto energies contacted through early. Uranus trining Venus and Pluto sextiling Neptune gives a sense of feeling fairly comfortable with the fact that they were perhaps a little unusual, and different circumstances.
Yeah, the Pluto-Neptune one I like to mention. Of course, that's a generation thing that's been ongoing for about 40 or 50 years, 40 years now. And that's true of all people born at this time. The Venus-Uranus one, of course, being unconventional, being innovative, doing unusual things and feeling free to move from one place to another, all that sort of thing. That is very individual aspect, you're right now.
I think that what's important is what transits are being received to the Sun, because it's currently having the retrograde Mars pass over it and the retrograde Saturn. And so this is a time when this person has the opportunity to take this potential and crystallize it, make it something that works for them in society. They don't have to be rejected by the parents or somehow.
Yeah, right. Good. Okay, well, we pretty well know this person pretty well by now, don't we? So
there's just one other thing to mention that's very important is the Sun, which is ruler of the ascendant, is conjunct that Neptune, but the Neptune is almost exactly square the ascendant.
Yes.
It's a very important one, and especially in terms of relationships.
Yes.
Not getting difficult to get a very clear perspective earlier on relationships, wanting an ideal or romanticising in some way, or also quite hard to get a perspective on self. Earlier on also.
And
spiritual, as you're saying, there's a lot in this chart. It's really positive, isn't it? A real spiritual.
I'd love to see them for a friend.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, being misled, however, with that Neptune square ascendant, or tending to mislead, or appearing to be misleading to other people.
Yes, unintentionally, possibly.
Yes, well, entirely unintentionally.
Right.
The openness of the Leo ascendant and the directness of the Uranus, this is me, taking me, but not understanding that inner self because of it all down on the bottom of the chart. And the Neptune is that special quality of service, isn't it, to others? Well, this is what I'm giving you. Don't ask me to explain it. This is what it is.
Right. Well, actually, knowing the person David's got a good understanding of. Do you know who this is?
No.
I don't think she'll mind me telling you who she is at the end. Okay. Right. Not here at the moment, unfortunately. Right, so now we've got to try and counsel. This is the whole purpose of the thing. Right, let's assume that that one had explained all this in a counselling situation. We're now to a situation where we have to talk about the person's how other people see it. Well, you tell me. You're the client. I've explained your nature to you through all these other people's words, but supposing I'd said all that. Now, what should we call her? Should we call her Peggy? Peggy. Not Peggy?
Something unusual.
What do you want to call her? Percy.
That'd be a watery name, a goddess.
You'll be amazed when you know this person's name, actually. We call it, well, I don't, how can I say? Well, Persephone.
Very good, very good.
Yeah, okay. Well, Persephone, you know... No, you're going to have to... yeah, I know, it's really nice to listen.
Persephone can be as well.
Yeah. So I think we can somehow, we've got to try and make this a serious business, and if you just pretend you're flies in the wall and fade back into the distance and you're not really here at all. So I don't know if we can do this, but just by trying to do it, just like by trying to visualise colour or trying to visualise auras, you start learning how to visualise auras, so maybe we can do it. Well, Persephone, you've heard what I've been saying about your chart. I don't know how you feel, whether that's right or not. Does it seem accurate to you?
Well, some of it means something, but a lot of it you haven't really seen exactly into what I really feel.
Any areas particularly you want to tell me about?
Well, you haven't said anything to me about what it really is that I am.
What it really is who you are. Yeah.
I mean, I want to know that.
Yeah. You mean that what you are as an individual, separate to other individuals, or what you are in a sort of further, more absolute sense?
In a more, I guess a more absolute sense. But yeah, that, and I mean, I know I've got something to give to this world. I mean, I know I've got something to do. I'm different from the other people, and I just want to know what it is that I've got to do here.
What gives you greatest happiness? Now, when you really feel good, you know, when you're moving around the world and things like that, what gives you the greatest happiness?
What gives me the greatest happiness is when I feel that I am with people who are not they don't have to be like me, but who are just accept me the way I am, and I can just be what I am and feel.
Okay, so like what I'm getting from is a kind of a bit of a struggle with this. You know, that's how you want to be. Now, what seems to be happening, particularly this Mars in the 12th, is that you're tending to sort of feel that you can't be like that. You know, every time you feel comfortable, you feel, well, that's not quite right. I've got to do something a bit more. You can't rest comfortably in being yourself. Now, supposing we try and reverse the process, and instead of you looking too much at what the world expects of you, or what some higher sort of understanding or consciousness or God, whatever you think, expects of you, why not sort of let go of this tendency to feel that you're not doing it properly, and to really accept, you know, take about 3 steps back from yourself and accept that you are doing it properly, and that your purpose is not so much to fulfill other people's expectations, but rather to be yourself, whatever you are, to be respected for what you are, so that instead of you feeling that everything's imposing down on yourself, you're more radiating out a kind of ability to transform and bring greater happiness to everyone, you know.
But how can I do that when people never understand me? I mean, how can I do that whenever I try to talk with people, or whenever I just want to be with people, that they never understand me?
Yeah, well, it's not so much the question of this is where that water over there is really putting me off. It's not so much that you have to be understood. I mean, like, this is where I think that the unease is coming in. You're constantly looking for understanding other people, rather than assuming you are understood and where you stand is acceptable to other people.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, but like what I found is if I just assume that people understand me and that I can just, you know, that I'm just me and I'm living and everything, and then suddenly I find that it's not like that at all. They've got these strange ideas about me.
Yeah, well, you look at you look at the world as it is, you know, and you see that all sorts of people are going through these anxieties. People tend to try and follow what their parents told them, what their sort of social group tells them, what people their own age tells them, and try and sort of perpetuate that and be like that, you know. But in fact, they are very, and they say, well, I'm confident. I am the child of Joe and Mary. I am going to this school. I'm a pupil at this school, all that sort of thing. They think that, therefore, I'm all right. But if you took away the prop that they base their life on, then they would be very nervous and anxious and feel completely lost. Now, you've been born with a chart that won't allow you to rest on an easy support from other people. You're a very independent person, you're a very individual person, you're a person that tends to transform and sort of create great change wherever you go. You're a person who needs a lot of individual freedom, therefore you can't rest easily on something. Now, at first sight that might seem to be a disadvantage, but if you look at it more deeply, you're in a better situation than anyone else, because you are beyond sort of relying on other people. You're a very independent, individualistic person. All you've got to do is say, I'm all right, I'm okay, and people will say, isn't it amazing, here's someone who's okay even though she's so strange. And by doing that, it'll allow them to let go of the attachments and the anxieties they've got, and therefore instead of feeling that you've got to do something, you'll find that what you're doing gives confidence to more and more people, and therefore you'll feel more confident in yourself. I don't know if that seems a bit far-fetched, but that, I think it's just a question of being happy with what you are and being excited about the unusual and transforming things and situations you can get involved in with other people. And then you can radiate a lot of love, a lot of feeling, a lot of devotion, a lot of sort of responsibility and happiness in the world. Does that make any sense to you?
Well, yeah, I can sort of understand that, what you say about just sort of really accepting myself and feeling that I'm all right.
Yeah, right.
And that it doesn't matter what...
Yeah, I go stage further than that. Even because you've got such a strong and dynamic way, what you tend to do is turn the aggression in on yourself with this Mars in the 12th, right? If you don't allow that to happen, but say, not only do I feel I'm all right, but look at me, the world, I am all right, you know, I am all right, you know. And so like, you all right too? I'm all right, you all right? You know, that sort of attitude. Don't turn it in on yourself, push it out again, but with happiness and joy and radiance, because you've got a Leo ascendant, you know. I feel sure that will solve the problem. And having, you know, this is all talking about the natal chart here. If we look at the way the transits are going at the moment, I feel this is a really amazing opportunity for you to go through a lot of change in the way you communicate with other people. You've got Saturn and Mars going across your Neptune, Sun, Mercury, retrograding backwards and forwards. They have been for some months now. And you'll find that although you may feel a bit inadequate and aggressive in your communication at this time, at the same time it's a time to get beyond that feeling of inadequacy and aggression, because it's a trine to Mars in the 12th house. It's a time to bring out, to do this process, this very process I've been describing. So
okay, sure, you've told me about those planets doing those things, but how do I do it? What do I do?
Well, at the moment you're going to feel that it's difficult, but that you can't carry on any longer not trying to sort of stop giving yourself such a hard time, right? But and the trouble is with Mars and Saturn working together, it's a sort of feeling restriction but struggling with restriction. And you know, the whole of this conversation is really describing that transit that you're talking about, that I'm talking about. Yeah? So realise that at this time, and then I haven't got the ephemeris with me, you work out exactly how long it will be, right? Realise at this time, for these months ahead, you're going to be going through this kind of struggle, not to be too impatient with it, but realise that this is the opportunity for you to no longer feel that after X months from now, that it will be cleared. Now, particularly the Mars energy will be cleared in a month or so, because then Mars moves on quite happily. There's a possibility of a big change in the foundation of your life as you come up to about a month or so from now, when Mars moves across your Indian. It will touch your Venus in about 2 months' time, 3 months' time, and then move into the 5th house. There'll be a lot of creative development going on, and generally you'll find your life picking up, and the restrictions you feel in communication clearing quite well as we get towards the springtime. You may find it a little bit difficult in the home situation. You'll want to, but you'll accept that limitation. You'll feel that you've come through a big watershed as far as your communication with other people is concerned. And I think generally with Jupiter in the house of work, you're going to feel healthier than you have done for many years. You're just coming through a big transforming experience with that Jupiter trining Pluto and coming up to Saturn. So generally, and there's a lot of good relationship energy next year, I feel that you could see this as the time when you break with patterns of feeling inadequate and really get into a lot of good relationships with other people next year. So if you see all these developments occurring, I think you'll find that what seems a little bit difficult at the moment, and what has been difficult all your life, won't seem so difficult from next year, and you'll feel a lot better about it. Okay, shall we stop at that
You're
point?
losing your voice.
I know,
Right,
I'm
so
really feeling fully exhausted on this. Yeah. But Helen did brilliantly, I think. That was just, I don't know how she did it, it was amazing.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. Was that any help? Did that give you any sort of idea on it? Did anybody want to make any comments or analysis on it?
Well, one of the things I would have done, Roy, is I would have helped her find ways to facilitate the energy. I would have helped her find ways to actually institute in a conscious way the energy that was opening up for her. That's what I would have done. Because I always find that's important, to give them something to actually start grounding their insights through.
Yeah, can you be more specific about
All right, well, let's see. The Mars going over this Neptune, Sun, Mercury thing, I mean, my God, she is so sensitive right down there. She is incredibly sensitive, so open, and she's got to hide it all, you know. With the Mars and the Saturn going over there, she'd really be feeling it. And we could look at things, I could say, well, we could just look at, for a start, physical things.
Are you feeling getting into what the person is now, feeling much more into the map? Into being responding, being what the person is?
Well, as you know, I understand the symbols.
And
I understand, I can see how the things work, so I can, with the cerebral cortex understanding and with some of my own natal energies that I understand that are similar, I can relate quite strongly to this chart, and I can get a glimpse of how it must be for her, if you understand me.
But if you want to be questioned, if you want to speak a great thing about yourself.
Well, she's done a pretty good job on that.
Time might be used for other things. I could do that, but it might.
So what are we going to do?
Well, we've got 2 others to do, and what I'm going to do after this is put you in the situation that Helen and I in small groups around your tables with another client.
Yeah, like
and you can choose a different role.
What I was saying about, I do think it's important to get this across to people that are doing any counselling, that you do find something that they can start to ground those insights into and make that energy work. And just briefly, she's got Mars going over there, so for a start I would start to look at physical activity, at some constructive physical activity that she may do. And with the Neptune being there, I would perhaps dance, or very strong dramatic activity. I would investigate that with her, and then of course with the Saturn being there, some sort of discipline and growth, or some sort of objective also, not just random physical activity, but some point behind it.
What do you feel about Roy saying that you're an independent person?
Oh yeah, I sure am. But at the same time, I want love.
Yeah.
You know, I want
You
love.
are dependent, but you're independent in the way you go about satisfying your dependence.
Because I saw
Yeah.
a contradiction there that the manner is independent, but the person is dependent.
Sure. Yeah.
Wants love.
Well, you could feel that in the way that Helen was doing it. She was constantly asking for someone to tell her what to do.
But you were keeping
And I was trying to tell her, look, I was trying to make her more independent, or more detached from her dependence, and to push out. What I was trying to do was to push out.
He was trying to make me encapsulate in the deepest recesses of myself the Sun, Neptune, Mercury, Scorpionic energy, which is, very strong, powerful, resourceful independence, as well as all the other things that talk about independence in the chart. And what I've been doing with that is I've just been so open through that, even though I've got all these structures up here that make me look so tough and so strong. I'm still really open, and I'm still, because that's what I'm seeking. I'm seeking through that to be loved and accepted and not hurt.
But I was actually showing that. Well, I was showing how you...
Up here that make me look so tough and so strong. I'm still really open, and I'm still, because that's what I'm seeking. I'm seeking through that to be loved and accepted and not hurt.
But I was actually showing that. Well, I was showing how you act independent, and people think you're independent. But are you showing people that you are dependent, emotionally?
By dramatic actions, I think I might.
There's also a question, I was also very consciously trying to work on that Mars in the 12th, trying to stop her turning the aggression in on herself and sort of push it out, because that seems to be very important. You seem to be trapped in that, in the way you were, level you interpret the chart.
That Neptune squaring that axis, as that she comes across as sort of out of it, not quite there, sort of, a bit
that's
jerky.
very accurate. That's very accurate.
Emotions you have about yourself.
Pardon?
How do you tell this Saturn, this period, which happens to be that Saturn is moving over your Neptune and Sun, how do you feel about it in terms of your view of illusions that you've had about yourself?
Well,
has it cleared that at all?
well, what I feel is that maybe some of the reason that people have, that I'm not really understood by people, is because I've been learning more about myself, and that some of the things that I do, people react to in a strange way. So I've been learning that some of my behaviour is what brings that reaction back to me. And sometimes I've sort of been feeling really, really sort of good one day, and then sort of the next day I've sort of felt really quite, not really very happy, as if it's not really much point to things, and why am I really bothering, and what does it matter?
What do you really want to do? I mean, what you always really wanted to do, get on with all your life since childhood? And why don't you?
Well, what I really wanted to do is, because it's what I've really wanted to do is understand the occult energies, all of them.
And what do you want to do in a practical sense? How do you use your energy? How do you want to use your energy as a child?
As a child.
You said that you wanted to find some practical way, like dancing. Well, why don't you dance? Why haven't you?
Oh no, that was the counsellor advice.
Okay, David, let's just pop at that point. Lawson wanted to say something, and then I fairly quickly want to get on to the other two things. Yeah.
I want to say that I think that this is an excellent opportunity for you to do a creative visualization course. You have an immense power within you. You are very creative in your visualizations. And I think that you can, if you have a structure in which you can use this power that you have, and that's what the visualization technique would teach you, then you are a very effective healer. of yourself and of other people, you can release all of this occult energy through the healing power that you have.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Good. Okay. Yeah. Go on, Kevin.
I would also at this point, however, of course, would understand why, recommend some sort of mental, spiritual discipline like Tai Chi, which uses that 12th house martial energy in a martial art form, but in a controlled, Saturn, constructive way, and particularly with that Saturn Mars on the Neptune, which is something that is dance, well, it is grace, and using the martial energy in a graceful way. The Neptune is ruler of the 8th house, which is spiritual discipline too, and I'm sure it would be one of the first things that came into Helen's mind. I mean, not as a client, but as the counselor.
Yeah, right.
You know a great instructress for you.
But can I just say a teeny bit about what I was trying to do there? I was very much working with what I was constantly trying to do, at least, was working with the archetype of the emotional or the experience of that clients seem to be stuck in, and trying to sort of vibrate with that. And then when when she wasn't letting go of that, then you notice that the technique I often use, I started moving them on to how the energy was at the moment and trying to use the symbols, even though they don't know much about astrology, trying to use the symbols to show that there was a future. This was in the middle of a process that was going on, that there was going to be change. And then trying to get them to step back from the situation they're in. The practical techniques that Lawson and Kathy were suggesting are also very good ways of getting the client outside themselves and outside the trap of their predicament. But just in my own particular style, I tend to work very much with the energy. And when I was talking about interpretation in the first session, I was saying that when I get through this sort of fairly controlled and disciplined description of the energy, then most of the rest of the session is just sort of trying to relax the tensions, any tensions that are there. Helen was displaying quite strong tension with this energy. And of course it's a little bit of an artificial situation. I usually don't find it quite as difficult as I found it here. When you've got somebody playing the part, they're not, when Sharon's doing a brilliant job, but they're not actually that person experiencing that thing. I think actually Helen was a bit overplaying the part. Not a judgment, you know.
Didn't think you did, I did alright. Did I overplaying the part?
No, please, don't misunderstand me.
Who's got the chart?
I'd like to make this point. Now, what I'm trying to say is, I'm not criticising Helen, I'm just saying that if you're acting a part, you sometimes, because it's not actually your total internal experience.
There wasn't
of life,
the empathy that there would have been between astrologer and client. That empathy wasn't there because it wasn't. As you say, it's an artificial situation.
Yeah, right.
So you would have been bouncing off the energy that was coming from your client, that would have been coming at a very real level, and you would have been reacting to that. That's what you would have been working with.
Yeah. And because I don't think that the experience of this lady can be absolutely your experience.
Of course not.
That you probably, from my own experience, you held on to the problem a little bit longer than, in fact, in real life a client would have done.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. We just say the same different words. But David, do you want to say anything?
I don't think so, actually.
Why? In my experience, that's so.
I think that only now with the Saturn and the Sun will she actually be learning to let go
You may be right. It was a very interesting point, and I think, having picked it up beautifully and really worked with the energy as it was very, very well.
Just one thing about, I know the way the chart's drawn up and it doesn't have the nodes in it.
No, that's because we weren't given the information, we didn't have a chance to do
But the nodes sometimes give an overview that could quite change what...
That's interesting, actually.
You could certainly do as pointing the client toward the future, toward the...
Everybody got an affirmative theory, we like to look up the notes?
Well, I'd just like to say that any client of that kind of configuration for them to have actually come to the point of saying I must go to somebody else, a counsellor, to reveal all this about myself would be pretty potent.
That's right. Those energies will be in a state of being.
7th of November 1960.
Money, and this is going to go for money's worth, and so it's a very tense situation. Probably are living down here on the earth, maybe never long.
I think she'd come and say, right, teach me astrology all in 1 hour, and I'll go away and I'll get some stuff.
I think Helen's point about externalizing her energies, putting them into action and is of the essence, because she needs real, tangible, practical things to involve herself in.
Start to release those
energies. The North Node is in 13 degrees of Virgo and the 2nd.
And the 2nd, is it? Coming from the 8th? Yeah. Wow.
Is it the 1st?
Is it?
That's right, you're right, it is, it's in the 1st. Yeah.
Oh, it's 13 Virgo, right.
That's interesting, it squares Venus, and no axis square to Venus, yeah. Okay. Yeah, great, good on you, Cal. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now I don't think this lady, who is a very special person, in fact the level we're working on is in fact below her spiritual level. She could easily be in this predicament that we've been working with, but I don't think she is. Her name is Zero, and she's not here this morning because she went off to help I think a married group of musicians down in south of the lake, and she'll probably be back later today. She was trying to get back here today to hear you do all this on her. She's a very special lady.
She does, yeah.
And she has, of course, realised and worked with, and I suspect transcended a lot of the problems that we're dealing with. But I think I was amazed when I heard Helen act, because it was so much like her I think she would have been before she gained release and confidence in herself. You know, it was really spot on, almost the accent, you know. It was really good. So, okay, we've got enough of it. Now it's your section. Now, I think probably...
You want me to answer those, right?
Yeah. Now, what I think we'll do... I wonder if we do them all... Should we all do one? What's the time now? So we've only got about half an hour. We've got time for one, really, haven't we?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Is the matchbox in the left or the right hand?
It's in your right hand.
We'll do this one then. Okay. Right, now, those who have this one with all the Taurus up there on the ascendant.
Oh, good.
How many people have got that one? Put their hands up. And have you ever got the one with Taurus on the ascendant? You have? Yeah? You have? You have now. You have. And you have. No one else has got the one with Taurus on the ascendant. There must be some more of these. Okay, here we are. Don't look at the name. Now, what I want you to do in your groups is to choose one person to be the client, one person to be the counsellor, and have the others as observers, and do what we've done in the whole group, in your mini group. And Gary will be back in a minute, I presume. Helen's here, Kathy's here, and I'm here. If you hit any snakes, just shout out and we'll come and help. Okay? Enjoy this. So any one of you three gets to sort of decide as
Right, now here we are. Then about this table over here.
When you just choose a group of help.
And that what their most immediate reaction to what is